Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kevin Askew, Director of Sales at TechXtend. I want to welcome you to today's free webinar series, Maximizing Data Quality for Value and ROI. Today's session announcing CA ERwin R8.2 and Web Portal. Today's agenda will include a little bit about TechXtend, followed by the CA ERwin Complete Compare Overview and Best Practices webinar hosted by Victor Rodriguez, Data Management and Data Warehousing Consultant at TechXtend, followed by a question and answers period and a summary. TechXtend is a leading e-seller of developer and infrastructure tools. We can be found at www.techextend.com. ERwin falls under our database worldview ecosystem. For CA, TechXtend is the #1 data modeling reseller in North America. We also have a dedicated CA sales and engineering team focused on database modeling and infrastructure design and training. Under our database worldview, we provide industry-leading tools for your end-to-end database infrastructure needs, including design modeling, development and test, management and administration, deployment and migration, performance monitoring and tuning, and reporting and mining. I'll now turn things over to Victor for today's webinar. Victor?
Thanks. Hello. Thanks, Kevin. I hope everyone can hear me. I just wanted to clarify something on that earlier slide. You probably saw a complete compare there. I think that was just an update on the slide. Not Kevin's fault, by the way. Probably just something we forgot to clean up before the presentation. And I just wanted to make sure that we are definitely going to be looking at ERwin 8.2 and the new web portal features. And that's really what we're going to be covering topic today. So I do have presentation, just checking that this is all working correctly. And yes, it is. And I'm actually working remotely today, so hopefully we won't have any technical glitches along the way. Please do feel free to reach out, or I should say ask any questions along the way as we're doing the presentation. I hopefully have enough time allotted at the end, although we'll be covering a lot of ground. If I don't get to your questions during the presentation, I will definitely reach out to you afterwards because there's a lot to cover today, and I definitely want to spend most of that time doing the web portal demo. So let's talk about what is new in ERwin 8.2. So the agenda for today, we'll look at the new features in 8.2. We have the active model templates. I'll explain to you in more detail what that is. Concurrent licensing option, the new SQL Azure support for the cloud, which is something that's being supported now in ERwin, the latest version of ERwin. And then, of course, the web portal and a demo. So let's just kind of give you a high-level definition of each one of these active model templates. What this allows you to do is, have more flexibility in the reuse of model, model properties across multiple models in a way that's not ever been fully supported as well as it is now. So many of you may have used ERwin templates in the past. You created a standalone ERwin_TMPL file or something like that. And that file was a file that allowed you could add it as a source to another model, and then you would move those properties over. Now this is much more, much more dynamic. You actually have the ability here of linking any model to another, create basically a relationship between multiple models, put a filter in between those two models to basically say you want certain properties to migrate over, and then you actually have this as an active template. So changes to the parent model automatically propagate downwards. So some scenarios where this is really useful is kind of these new initiatives that are around. For example, you can imagine where you could have a master model where you contain your master data definitions, and you have just those high-level entity definitions, let's say, for example, and you can have your users basically, your business users can maintain the definitions in that level, and then once it's updated in that parent model, it will propagate down, filter down into all the subordinate models that are getting any of those master data definitions from that one model. So you basically are allowing to separate who does what within the context of your design. Another example of where you may do this, for example, let's say that your application developers have to use domains that have been explicitly defined by somebody, by the data architect, for example. You can actually have a template file that contains all your domain definitions. Once a new domain is added, you can basically say, okay, this passes our approval process. We've added the domain to the template file, and then, of course, any model related to that template file will automatically propagate those changes. By the way, you can block that, so if for some reason you launch a model and you decide to not synchronize those changes over. You'll be informed that there are changes, but you do not have to force the auto update, and you can disable auto update at any time in case you want to make a model static from that point forward. But the really nice feature, really powerful feature is during a production cycle of having this active communication between these models. So you can imagine there's many other ways you can use that, data warehousing implementations, especially dimensional modeling and things like that. Very powerful ways you can have these definitions for reusable dimensions and things like that. Very, very powerful. And that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So hopefully get your mind racing towards ways you can use that, a great new feature. Concurrent licensing. So the second one, new feature here, pretty straightforward. I have a couple of slides that go into this in more detail, so I'll just introduce it briefly here. But it's basically the ability of checking out a license when you need it, releasing that license when you don't need it, so you can have this concept of a floating license. Maybe you have one license between two different environments. Sometimes you work remotely, sometimes you work in the office, and you want to be able to check in and check out that license depending on what environment you're actually in. Maybe you're in a virtualized environment sometimes and you need to run it from there. You can actually request licenses when you need them. More flexibility in your environments. But even more powerful, of course, more flexibility in the way you actually manage your teams. So maybe somebody sometimes is a navigator, they don't need a full production license. Sometimes they are, modelers, they're working with your model manager repository, for example. They get a full workgroup edition so they can actually save models to the repository. Maybe you have an international team. Sometimes your US team is using the software. Sometimes your India team or Canada team or European team is using it. Don't necessarily need to have 8 licenses. You can maybe have 3 licenses since no one's ever going to be using them simultaneously. And so a lot more flexibility on licensing. If you're curious about that, reach out to us. I'll give you some contact information at the end, and you can kind of weigh out different licensing options. It's mix and match, by the way. You don't have to go all concurrent. You can actually say, okay, we have 2 or 3 fixed licenses, and then 5 or 6 concurrent licenses, or vice versa, more fixed licenses than concurrent. It's up to you, and your sales associates can help you, price it out to your best, so it works best for you. The web portal, right? Another huge feature. This is, I'm going to go into this in much more detail in this presentation, but the web portal is a web-based, no software required, web-based, searchable metadata repository where users can simply go in there, your business users, for example, who don't have any ERwin knowledge, simply go in there, do a search on a keyword business term, locate models, objects that contain those definitions, and then they can actually navigate to those specific models, see them in a web interface, publish them from there, look at data lineage across multiple models. Really, really powerful tool, and we'll be looking at that in much more detail. So active model templates are kind of introduced this in pretty high level already. I'm going to kind of be a little redundant here, but it allows you to reuse objects that you share across multiple models. So it's kind of these activities I mentioned before, any place where you kind of want to establish some kind of standards, or you need to actually have models that are going to be communicating back and forth across multiple designs. Very, very powerful, reusable application. And like I mentioned before, you actually can easily reuse those. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, as I kind of mentioned here in this slide. And it's a wizard-driven interface, so very straightforward. Once you add one model, it can be any model now, by the way. I think I mentioned that before, but no longer needs to be specifically stored as a template file. Any ERwin file that's out there, simply you just load it up as a model template, and then you basically get a filter ability, which just shows you the objects that exist on both sides of the models. You specify which objects you want to share, or which properties within those objects you want to share, and then once the filter is in place, everything is passive from that point on. So it's a great new usability of the template features. So this is kind of a lot of what I just mentioned here. You can always use just .ERwin files, no longer need to be specifically TMPL files. It's the next generation, an evolution of some of the flexibility features that we've seen in the past. Concurrent licensing, so it's my second point now. Available for standard edition of ERwin, which is just your standard flavor of ERwin. The workgroup edition, of course, which is the collaborative repository-based version of ERwin. Navigator edition, which is a read-only version of ERwin. And also for SQL Azure. So SQL Azure is basically a different license that can be applied to ERwin that gives you the ability of actually being able to model in a SQL Azure environment, in a cloud environment, Microsoft SQL Azure, by the way. So concurrent licenses can exist in a mixed environment, like I mentioned before. You can actually have them locked into one node if you want to have a fixed license, or you can have this check-in, check-out license ability. But only one type of license is available on one workstation at a time. So your workstation is either going to be a fixed license or it will be a concurrent licensing. And the user can make that decision, at the time that they request a license. So it's pretty straightforward, very simple to install and use. It needs to be simply need to have installed on an accessible workstation. So you need to have this licensing agent. It's not a full server. It is an application that runs on a server. You basically just need to have this visible to all of your end users. It could be via VPN or via any kind of subnet or, of course, on the live network. But anyway, they can actually communicate with this workstation where the application, license application lives. Then they should be that user will be able to check in and check out their licenses. Like I mentioned, you do not require a devoted server or database. This is not something that is going to take up a lot of resources. It's a very, very light application, which is simply just passing license information back and forth, which if you've ever received one of those licensing files, it's really just a couple of lines of text. It also includes an administration dashboard, which is just web-based. Once again, there's no application that needs to be installed on the local administrator's environment. They simply log into this web portal to see this license administration, and there's some really nice features in there. Not only can they see who has what licenses checked out at any given time, they can actually revoke a license if they need to manage it, aggressively from that location, and they can also run reports. So you can actually use this. So let's say, for example, you decide you've started with concurrent licensing, but maybe we really want to get a few fixed licenses for some of our more power users, and you want to kind of figure out which direction you want to go with that. You run your reports, and you can actually see who's checking out the licenses most frequently, how often are they checking them out, for what amount of time are they using the licenses. So it's very straightforward, just point-and-click reporting gives you a really good overview of how your modelers are actually using those licenses, and then you can be even more strategic with them as you go forward. Very straightforward, very little configuration. It's really just point and click. When you actually get around to playing with it, it's a very simple interface. So the new licensing dialog, once you upgrade to 8.2, the very first time you launch ERwin, you will actually get this dialog will pop up, and you'll see that you're going to be specified to either use a local license. If you already have a current local license, not only can you just click OK and everything continues to work the same way, you can actually suppress this simply by clicking on the Do Not Show This dialog again, and that's it. So when you get 8.2 installed, you'll see this interface. You can ignore it from that point on. Pretty straightforward. However, if you do want to use request a concurrent workgroup edition license or any level of a key license that you happen to have for that flavor of ERwin, you can simply select that option, and then you'll be presented with your licensing interface to specify the server location for the server itself. And then you'll actually be connected to that server and request your licenses at that time. You'll see here you can also have a SQL Azure flavor from the same interface if you decide to go with that version. The way this works is that there's a communication, there's a heartbeat that goes back and forth between your ERwin instance and the license server. Let's say you're working remotely and maybe you get some bad storms, or maybe your network is a little flaky, and you're concerned that losing that connection is going to make you lose your ERwin license. You actually have a 4-hour leeway. So if the system goes down, ERwin will basically prompt you and say that we've lost communication with the server, and you have 4 hours, and it counts down. So you have 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, and then at the 1 hour mark, you actually get every 10 minutes, it warns you that your license is ready to expire. So there's two options there. Of course, you can save your work before the license expires, or simply reconnect with the server. As soon as you reconnect with the server, the clock goes away, and you get the full 4 hours back, by the way. So even if your network is very flaky, as long as you can kind of ping the server at least every 4 hours, you won't have any problems. If somebody logs off, by the way, you don't have to manually check in and check out the licenses. If your user simply shuts down ERwin, as soon as they shut down ERwin, the license is immediately available for anybody else who needs it. So you don't have to worry, for example, that maybe you have an international team and someone has checked out a license and then they forgot to check it back in, and now you have to go in there and the administrator has to get involved every single day. That's not the way it works. As soon as that, basically the network goes quiet with that signal from that instance of ERwin, the license is immediately available back into the pool, so any other user can pick it up if they need to have access to it. So pretty flexible methodology, and I don't really anticipate that people will have many problems with it going forward. So this is the new licensing dialog box. You may have often seen this. It's from the help menu. You just go to help licensing. This is where you used to, install a physical. This is where you would go to get your Mac ID. If you've used ERwin 8 in the past, we needed to request a Mac ID from the CA folks, the licensing team, when we had a new installation. And you would come here also not only to acquire the Mac ID, but also to install a license file. And you see that install license file button in this dialog screen, and that's where you would load, and it still is, by the way, the exact same way you would load a single physical local file, and you do it once and you don't have to worry about it again if you have that fixed license. Alternately, with this new concurrent licensing scheme, you would actually specify the server path right there at the bottom of the dialog box. You simply put in the server name there, and then and that's it. You would close out, and then you will next time you relaunch ERwin, you will need to specify which kind of license you would like from the available batch of licenses. So moving to the cloud, many users are strategizing moving some of their data to the cloud. As a matter of fact, most companies have moved some amount of their data to the cloud. But of course, there's a big issue with thinking of, how, there's a lot of concerns about security, basically. So what's often happens, and it's actually very much a best practice, is to model your systems, which is always the best practice. So modeling systems obviously very key, and any data model, data architect will tell you that you should model everything, but especially in the context of security, privacy, et cetera, because it's pretty straightforward, or not straightforward, but it's a very powerful tool to be able to model all of your system data, and then to start looking at that and say, okay, well, which of this information do I necessarily want to move to the cloud, and which one do I absolutely not want to move into the cloud? Or maybe I'm going to have a public cloud and a private cloud to take advantage of all the flexibility that cloud gives me. But regardless, even if I'm going to move everything into the cloud, I'm going to have a private cloud for my social security numbers, for my customers' credit card information, things like that that I may not want to move into a public cloud. But the model, of course, is going to contain all of my data, whether the metadata that I plan to keep secured or more secured, the ones that I want to move to the cloud. So this allows me to strategize with my business folks, with my administrators, with my application developers about what am I going to move in what way. So modeling is really key in this regard. And it would be really nice if after you strategize around these ERwin models to say, okay, well, what am I going to move in what direction, that I could actually have a direct interface with that cloud environment. And as far as Azure goes, at least, ERwin now has the ability of doing so with a native support to reverse engineer, forward engineer, fully support a SQL Azure environment. It is a separate license, and you can reach out if you're curious to. There's actually a flavor of ERwin which is just SQL Azure and doesn't have all the other capabilities of reverse engineering, forward engineering to all the other databases. So if that's something that appeals to you, even if it's just for a very limited number of environments that you may have out there, then reach out to us and we'll kind of consult you in more detail about that specifically. So lastly, and that was all you needed to know about Azure. Pretty straightforward, like I said. If you're planning to move to the cloud, if you already have some Azure environments, very useful. Otherwise, probably something you may just want to think about for the future. But now this big feature, probably the most exciting feature, the one that most people are buzzing about, and what people have been requesting for the longest period of time, I think, is this web portal feature. So the web portal feature is a separate. It's not just built into ERwin, by the way. It's not baked in. It is a separate tool, but you actually can use this web portal with your ERwin environments. As a matter of fact, you really should be using it in the broader context of your ERwin and even your model manager. So before we get into all of this, I kind of want to give you kind of some strategies here. So let's say that you are not yet ready to migrate to 8.2 or 8.1, or maybe even some folks are just starting the migration to 8.0, but you really need the web portal. So you basically say, okay, well, 8.2 is going to have to go through some kind of validation process. That's going to take 3, 4, 5 months, but I would really like to start playing with the web portal, see if it fits for my organization, and start evaluating it right now. You can do that. The web portal can actually read ERwin models even from a model manager environment all the way back in 7.3. So, if you don't, I just kind of mentioned that because I don't want you to feel that you want to play with the web portal, but you're locked down because you're not on 8.2 or something like that. It will work with earlier versions of ERwin. So don't be afraid to request that evaluation, start your proof of concept, get the ball rolling, because by the time you actually implement the web portal, maybe you haven't quite migrated your ERwin yet, or maybe you'll basically be at a point where you can concurrently do both at the same time. So that's a key feature I wanted to mention there before anything else. The next point is that, and we're going to go into this in more detail on this next slide, but I want to introduce it now because this is probably a question that people immediately are going to ask, is the interface between this web portal and your model manager. Now, you don't have to have the model manager. That's another thing I wanted to mention. So maybe you have, you've always wished you had the model manager, but just because of your modeling practices, everything really is just still done with manual files. You don't have a central repository. If you have a central repository, the web portal is fantastic. It basically loads automatically from those models, really saves a lot on administration. However, that's not the world we all live in. Oftentimes we can't get the budget for it, or you just can't get a cultural approval to all put your same models in one shared repository. Don't worry about that. If you want the web portal and you only have standalone ERwin, the two pieces work together. You have to manually load the models into these configurations within the web portal, but it still works. It just is a little bit more of a manual process. So now I'm going to take a step back and kind of introduce the web portal at a higher level. Like I mentioned before, it's going to give you internet-style keyword search, very, very simple. We'll see that in a demo. Diagram visualization, so if you want to be able to conveniently see a diagram without someone having to install ERwin Navigator or another piece of software, very simple way of seeing that. Graphical impact analysis, you want to see your, the flow of data across multiple models. What is your data lineage? You can see that in these diagrams. Reporting, right? So oftentimes, a lot of data architects out there, you have to, you get a stack of reports that are being requested from you by your business analysts. This is a very simple way where they can go in there and just with a few clicks of a button build reports that they want on their own. Interfaces for business technical users, like I mentioned, you can actually create very, very different views of collections of models. So let's say you have some kind of data warehousing initiative. You can load 30 different models into one of these quote-unquote configurations, and we'll explain in more detail what that means. But basically, it's just a collection of models. But then your end users, as they're defined within their own security in this web portal administration, can actually have very, very different views. So maybe your business users are just concerned with conceptual designs, object definitions, entity definitions, let's say, for example, and that's pretty much where their concern lays. And they want to make sure that those definitions are accurate and reflect their, their standards. They can have one very specific view of those models, while your technical users might be looking at very specific application level, physical models. So it all is up in the air and customizable based on what your end users need to see. And then yes, easy to roll up out to multiple users. There's no local install, like I mentioned. This is simply a web interface. You just give them a URL. They can navigate to a particular model. You can even share those links, and we'll see that during the demo. So this is kind of like, just kind of an understanding of where does the web portal fit in. I think everybody out there understands the value of this. You're probably getting pressured by your business users, but the point being that traditionally data models were for your data architects, DBAs, data modelers, maybe some of your application developers. But now, we have this, with this massive explosion with the amount of data, businesses that are basically emerging from this recession and just going gangbusters right now are businesses that have realized that data is probably their greatest corporate asset. Those companies that are making a move in that direction are seeing massive growth. And now all companies, even smaller companies, are realizing, we need to kind of like ride this wave. We don't want to get drowned in this data. We want to kind of ride it out and, let it carry us somewhere better, or somewhere more powerful. And users are, businesses are understanding this. So of course now all of a sudden you're starting to get conversations from maybe other teams that have integrated with your team. They want to share their data. You want to clean that data. You have your BI teams that want to run reports. You have master data management initiatives that are trying to standardize, identify your, have a central center of truth for that data. Your developers traditionally, of course, want to have access to your metadata as well to make sure their applications are correct, or the data that they're passing to those systems are correct. And then, of course, now even at a very high level, your C-level people now want to look at that data because that data, those definitions are the definitions of what their company actually is. So at a very high level, you're trying to get this buy-in, and this web portal just makes that buy-in even more powerful. So this is just kind of, once again, all these different teams needing one central location to search for that information, and that's where the web portal comes in. There's two flavors, and if you're curious about this, you can reach out to us and we can go into it in more detail. The standard edition is much lower cost. It basically comes with right out of the box, it has like a SQL Server, a free edition of SQL Server as its back end. It has very limited customization. It's all manually loaded by end users. It's at a lower cost. So if you're a pretty small shop but you like this feature, there's basically a price point that's going to be good for you. The Enterprise Edition, more expensive, but of course it's definitely something that's more powerful for larger organizations. It can go up to from anywhere from 25 to unlimited users. It's much more customizable. You have the ability of creating many, many, many different views of that metadata to your end users. Costs more, of course, much more scalable and customizable, and it has the ability of self-feeding from a model manager repository, which is an incredible feature. If you have the model manager, to be able to configure something one time, this is my audience, this is who's going to see what, these are the models they're going to see, you configure once, and then as those models evolve, those users are seeing the latest version of those models all the time. Very powerful. It's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. For larger organizations, that's definitely the direction you want to go in. So there's two front-end, I should say two portals, I guess, to the portal. And there's two front ends to it. And one is the administration view, one is the Model Explorer. I don't know, depending on how much time we have, we will definitely see the end user experience, just the generic Model Explorer. And then to a lesser extent, I will show you the administration features as well. That's going to be much more cursory in the fact that, first of all, most of your end users are not going to be seeing the administration features. I can always have a one-on-one consultation with you if anyone is curious about administration features in more detail. But pretty straightforward. It's going to enable that end user experience that we're going to be going into in more detail. And I definitely want to leave enough time for everybody to ask me their questions at the end as well. So these are some slides, but we'll see this in just a moment. Once again, very straightforward, ability of just doing a search. You can do advanced search as well, so you can say this word with this other word, this word but not this other word, this word in the context of, pretty straightforward stuff. Pretty much standard type of advanced features you'd hope to see. You can open any of the diagrams that you actually locate based on your search, and you can see that in a very convenient web-based graphical interface. You select any object on the screen and you can see the properties on it. That's what that little pop-out window is that you're seeing there. A data lineage. So here's lineage within one particular model. So here we see the flow of columns between multiple models in a diagram. You can see this from views to tables, other features like that. And you can also see that across multiple models as well. And I'll show you that during the demo. And let me just make sure that this is correct. Okay, and this is my desktop, the same slideshow. And let me show you what this looks like. So this is in Firefox, by the way, but I'm actually going to show you this in Internet Explorer. And Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari, I've actually navigated this on my iPhone, and it works. Although, not the graphical components, but the other components work. It's Flash-based, that's why. If you have an Android device, though, you can navigate the graphical since Android supports Flash. We'll see if there's going to be an iPhone edition of this in the future. I hope so, but we'll see if that happens or not. But for the most part, like I said, any browser will support this. Any ones that I've tested anyway, and I'm pretty sure they've tested them with even more than the ones I have tested. So I'm actually just going to navigate to my portal URL. And I'd actually have multiple users here. This particular user is just a generic user. User 1 does not have any administration permissions, although I do have an administrator, and I'll try to show you that interface in the future. So I've logged in. Once again, this is nothing. This is not a separate installation of anything. This is simply, I'm just in Firefox, and I've just put in the URL, and I've logged in with these credentials. Those credentials, by the way, are credentials specific to the web portal. So it has its own administration, its own user accounts. This is not your model manager user. So, for example, users are not coming here and logging in with their model manager credentials. They're logging in with a separate set of credentials. And that is totally by design, obviously, because the expectation here is you may often have maybe 15, 20 different model manager users, but of course your business users and many other audiences would want to see this as well. So these are not the users from the model manager. These are completely unique, separate list of users, or they can be shared users, but their credentials are defined within the web portal administration. So when you log in, this is very straightforward, pretty straightforward. You can do search, you can do browse for model metadata, run reports, see Lineage. You can see favorite models. So at any time, you can just click the little yellow star on any model and make it a favorite, and then it'll be available from here to navigate to quickly in the future. Or you could select diagrams from a list of available diagrams. There's two basic interfaces here. One is this configuration list, and this basically is what the administrator defines. These are the list of models that this user has access to. Like I mentioned before, depending on who you log in as, you'll see different subsets of models. And then properties. Properties, basically, this is an active window that updates, changes, depending on anything I click on. So, for example, when I click on this particular configuration, it just gives me a name here. I actually don't have a description defined here, although I could have defined a description here, and author, and when was the last time this was modified. It hasn't been modified since it was created, apparently based on this. But it's so very high-level information. If I click on these particular subset of models here, now I do see a description here. The folder contains each of the data models specified in the order entry folder. And you can just mouse over for more information. You see the data was created, the last time it was modified, who the author is, and then other properties here as well. So you see how this updates constantly based on what I click on. But it's not just for configurations. This window also is going to give me object information when I locate a particular entity, diagram, or whatever that I want to navigate about. So now that I've introduced kind of the basic interface, let's start playing with some of these features. I'm going to do a new search. I'm going to type in customer. Pretty straightforward. You can actually have the ability of filtering at this top level on what level of the configuration you want to search on. I'm going to search on everything. And I'm just going to do a search here by clicking on this little arrow. You can just hit carriage return as well, or enter, I should say. And that will also give you the same result. So I see I have a whole bunch of results here, 44 results actually. Now, these 44 results actually are going to, you may want to filter down. So now that we have this initially run this result or this report on customer, I might say, you know what, these are all the types of objects that I've encountered. I actually don't want my relationships or my attributes. I really just want to focus on tables and entities. Maybe I don't want to look at all these available models that were returned here. Maybe I specifically want to look at my physical implementation. So I have an Oracle physical model, SQL Server physical model. So that looks interesting to me. And I can even specify what attribute types I want to look at. So maybe I want to look at the names of the objects, obviously, and maybe I want to look at physical comments, but not necessarily descriptions, or maybe vice versa. Let's do the opposite. I actually want my definitions rather than my physical comments. And now if I do a filter, I see, and now I only have 8 results. So an active way of quickly filtering down on available objects. So once again, like I mentioned, this properties window actually updates depending on what I select. So if I click on this row here of information on this order table for my SQL Server model, I see here the information update to reflect that. So I see the description of that object. I see the comment here as well. And there's other information if I scroll down. So you see here I've defined like a data steward. These are UDPs. So anybody out there who says, okay, I have all these UDPs in my models that I use to build this data dictionary, I want to make sure that that actually comes across, because that's going to be really powerful when I actually want to locate those objects or you know, publish them out to the rest of my team. All of that comes in here as well. So all your UDPs get published here. So you know, that's actually a key decision that was made, obviously, for the fact that, you know, the design team was fully aware those UDPs are often some of the most important information you have in those models. So you see that as I click on any one of these other, here's a product SKU table, I see the information on that one. You see the highlighted information wherever customer, wherever the string I'm looking for appears, it's automatically highlighted. So in this case, this one appeared in the definition, but not in the object name. And in some cases, it actually exists at the object name level as well. So pretty straightforward. Once again, this is really not a complicated thing to navigate. It does not require a lot of training to get your users up and running on how to do a search. It's pretty much how you expect it to work based on their experience with other search engines. So now that we have you know, this list of object results here, I should say, you'll also see that if I mouse over any of the actual top level headers here, there's actually an option here to open. And if I click open, let's take a look in this Oracle model, this ORDR table. If I click on there, I actually see that, you know, the Model Explorer, like I normally would see in ERwin, gets listed here as well. So I want to point out something else. You'll notice that here's my Home tab, here's the Search Results tab, and now here's the model that I just opened up as well. The reason I mention this is because they're opening in separate tabs. So as you're doing this exploration, maybe you open two different models at the same time. You're looking here, you're looking there. I don't know if this is the model I'm looking for. Maybe this is the model. Or what's the difference between the table and this model and that one? Why is it in two different places? So while you're doing all this, it's opening in separate tabs. So you can actually just close those tabs or just navigate to previous tabs. So it's not like you're losing your work and you're like, what was the search I just ran? Just click on the previous tab and you'll see exactly what you were just working on before. So it's very easy to find your way back and forth through this like kind of discovery that you're doing. So by clicking on this in the search result, I open the separate tab here automatically. It opens this model, this particular model within this tree structure here. Now all of these additional windows, by the way, can be opened and closed depending on how much I want to see here. But I have this metadata browser. So this is a really nice feature here, the metadata browser. And we're already running short on time, unfortunately. But you know, so the metadata browser here, this is what you expect to see, you normally would see when you opened a model in ERwin, for example. It's pretty much the same look and feel as you've seen before. And just like you expect to see in ERwin, if I expand this particular ORDR table that I was looking at, I see the attributes down below. So any object that I select from the list here, once again, properties update to show that. So if I go to this particular attribute, ORD ID, I see what the length on the data type is here, what the data type is, the definition of that object, and you know, the source here, definition source, and other information here as well. So anything that I've basically captured within the model can be reported on, or most of the high-level information can be reported on here within this report here. So the metadata browser, but you'll also notice even more useful to those end users is the diagram visualizer. So by clicking on this diagram visualizer tab, I now see a graphical representation of the model. And this is basically reflecting what exists in the database. This probably doesn't look too good from to everybody watching this on WebEx, so let me just zoom in so you guys see a better example. So here's the ORDR table. You see all the attributes within there. And once again, like we would expect, if I actually click on anything in the graphical display, it also will give me its properties in this properties pane. So if I click on the ORDR table, you see this little red highlight becomes active, and I see information on ORDR. If I click on one of the attributes down here, the ORD ship to address, I see it updates to match that. So very straightforward. You click on it here, the properties become available over here. So very simple way of doing that. I can actually search within this particular view. Let me zoom out to show you this in more detail. Now you can imagine this is a very small model, but you can imagine you have a giant Teradata model, let's say, for example, and you're looking for one specific table. I'm going to look for INV, for example. My search results show this one here. If I double click on it to specify, I see this little highlight becomes active, and it jumps, it centers on the screen the particular object that I'm looking for. It's a warning that I have a very short table name, but that's fine. Close that out. But you see how it located that object. So the point being that, once again, this is a very small model. I could have easily found that table, but you can imagine that if your end user has just opened a diagram, or if you send them a link to this diagram and they want to look at 3 or 4 different tables, they want to be able to quickly navigate to them, you can just use the search right up here. Speaking of publishing this out to your end users, if you've actually done the legwork, you've identified this model, or you have created this model specifically to illustrate something for them, maybe the application developer, and you want to show them the models that are being implicated by their application, you want to just kind of directly be able to say, here, look at this. How do you conveniently do that? In the upper right-hand corner in my tools, these actions, I should say, I have multiple tools here. But the one I want to point out is get link. So by doing get link, you see I have an HTTP URL here. I can copy this and basically put that in a wiki. If you're documenting this, in some place where a shared location for your users, put it in an email if you want to, and you can actually do that simply. Make it a convenient way for people to navigate around your metadata. So that's a diagram visualizer. I know that's a really important feature for users. But before we run out of time, I want to show you a handful of other key features. Let's say, for example, we want to be able to look at the lineage of a particular table across multiple diagrams. So what I'm going to actually do here, let me go back to my home screen. You could do this even from the window I was in there, but I want to kind of show you these features from a high level. So let me show you here from this point of view. I can actually go to my lineage options. I just select the model to trace lineage in. This opens up my configuration pane to the left here. I can look at these order entry model collection just by double clicking on them. This will show me, you see here, I see the lineage of all these models. Which models are they? I have a conceptual model, a logical model, an Oracle physical, and SQL Server model. But I want to see the lineage in much more detail. Let's say I want to look at the lineage in this logical order entry table. I'm going to open that one up. That opens it here on the right. And I want to see what happens to this order table across the entire configuration. So when I do that, what I see is this, and this is really pretty cool stuff. Let me zoom in here. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can read it a little bit better. But I see the flow of this data, the customer identification from the conceptual model through to the logical model, which of course I have many more attributes here in the logical model, and now I start seeing all of those attributes migrating over to my physical model here, the Oracle one, and to the SQL Server model there. If you want information on any one of these migration paths, by the way, you click on it, and just like everything else, go to Properties, and I see, for example, customer identification is migrating to the cust ID table, I should say cust ID column in the physical Oracle model. So really powerful and useful ways to actually show this flow of data. This could be not only from a conceptual to logical. You can imagine the usefulness of this from like a data warehouse to its source systems, for example, and seeing where those columns are coming from. So a really useful way of documenting that as well. And as before, from this, I have in this tools here, I can get a link, once again, a URL. I can share that with my team members so they can actually see the same graphical representation that I'm seeing of this configuration, or I can print it out. And this allows me to generate basically it opens this in a separate panel, and then from there you can actually do a print to plotter or print to any printer or generate a PDF. So a very convenient way of taking any of these images you see and generating PDFs from them as well. So before we run out of time completely, that's the lineage I wanted to show you. Reports, right? So you want to be able to create reports. You'll see there's multiple reports here. You can create business rules based on their definitions in your objects. A data model, here we only have logical listed, by the way, but yes, physical is supported as well. There's a patch that came out just today, or last night, I guess, that fixes this very problem where you can actually generate reports automatically for physical as well. Your data movement, right? So you have dimensional models. You've defined your source and target tables. You want to be able to run a report conveniently from there. You can do it here as well. Dimensional models, if you want to see, what are my fact tables, other such reports from here as well. And then you could also run reports on all of your UDPs within your models from one convenient location. So I'll show you one Pretty straightforward one here based on the data model. And this is just a tabular report, pretty straightforward. You see you have your entities, your attributes, and you actually, your end users can add columns here as well. In that patch that came out last night, by the way, even though you still see a very limited results set here, this column list is huge. It probably has 30, 40 different model properties. So it basically allows your end user to just put some checkboxes on and off, get exactly the metadata information they want, and then you just click on download, and this creates a CSV file that you can just save. See, this is just a CSV file. So that CSV file, obviously, a very convenient way to get that data out in a tabular format for Excel editing or anything like that. So that is another really key feature. Oftentimes I know for a fact that people complain about having to generate these reports and trying to locate some metadata, and it's not convenient all the time to get just simple tabular reports out of ERwin. This is a really, really simple way of doing that. So diagrams, this is pretty straightforward. It's the same thing I showed you before, but it's just a different way of accessing specific models. So here's the conceptual design. Here's the visualizer for the same thing. And I can minimize some of these windows to get a better representation. If I mouse over, I get a little pop-up window with some information on here. In this case, I only have names. So pretty straightforward. And like I said, this is exactly the same visualization as saw before, just a different way of getting to the same point in the design. Favorites is simply a collection of any favorite models that I've selected. And that's simply when I'm actually looking at a particular model. I'll show you where that's available from. That simply is this icon up here, favorite. So when I click on this little star, it becomes available as a favorite. By the way, there's different ways you can look at your metadata. So here's the metadata browser. When I open a model, I always default to this metadata browser view. You can change the one you're looking at. You can make a data dictionary report, and this basically just gives me like a list of all of the metadata. So once again, it doesn't change the model. It simply is a different way of visualizing it. I can actually do an UML object model. And not only does it show me the list in the way I would expect to see, for UML standards, the diagram itself can be represented as a UML model as well. Now, it's still a relational model. It's not actually a, it's not actually a UML model. It simply is represented as a UML model. But but it will show the notation as the user would expect to see. I'm not sure why that one's not giving me that result. Let me just go and open let me open a physical model here, Oracle. And go back to my diagram visualizer. And you see, for example, like UML. So this is just basically showing it, graphically representing it as you would expect to see a UML model. Maybe just because your application development team is more used to seeing it this way. But it's not truly, a UML model. This is still a relational model coming out of the, ERwin tool. So let me show you very briefly the administration console. I'm going to log in here. This is Internet Explorer. I'm just logging in as a different user administrator. This looks a little bit different. We have properties window here to the right, same as before, but I do see this repository tree to the left. This is where I can actually go and create my new models, new configurations, add users, add and remove models. And basically, when you actually come here and create a new configuration, you actually have the ability, here's in the security tab, you see who has access to view these particular configurations, and you can actually create a new model. Create a new configuration here. I'll add a model to it. Okay. I'm going to add a new model. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with this because I know we're running very short on time, but just to show you a few features here. First of all, like I mentioned before, you can load an individual file. That's a 7.x model, individual file, that's an 8.x model, but much more powerfully, multiple models from the model mark, whether it's an 8 or 7 model mark. So something really a powerful feature there. And then when I go to my import setup, you see I can actually connect to my model manager. And I'm not actually going to do this now, but I just want to show you how this works. I can connect with my credentials for the model manager. If I have permission to read the models from there, I'll be able to access them here. And then you can basically browse to the models. And when you browse to the models, you actually see the entire library structure. You could actually populate this configuration with every single model in the model manager, but that usually is not what you want to do. You probably want to create a configuration that would have a subset of models within one particular library, or even create a particular unique view that would have models from multiple configurations. For example, your library structure might have like a Teradata environment in one library, and then you might have source systems that are SQL Server source systems in another library, and Oracle in another library. But maybe these are all part of like a data warehousing initiative, so you might actually want to take models, cherry pick models out of each one of those into one specific configuration. You have all that flexibility here. You can create, you can either emulate your library structures or create completely unique combinations. So with that, I know we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to be able to take your questions. So let me wrap this up. I have a couple more slides that I want to speak to. Remember to go to ERwin.com, webinars, white papers, new releases, lots of really great information there. The user community, very active around the portal right now, a lot of chatter about the portal. Go there if you're curious. If you already have 8, you're looking for the latest version to upgrade to, you can download it here as well. We do have questions, but I guess I actually put this slide in early. I did want to have this one last thing, next action. So if you're already an ERwin user, whether you're on 7.3 or 8.0 or 8.1, and you're on current maintenance, I just kind of want to drive home the fact that, remember, 8.2 is part of your regular maintenance. If these features, the standard 8.2 features sound interesting to you, feel free to download and upgrade. Contact us about concurrent licensing. Do you think this strategy is going to work for your team? Is it going to be more expensive? Is it going to save you money? You're curious about it, reach out to us. We have some contact information at the end. We can try to run some different pricing, see what works best for you. Are you using Azure? Then you might want to ask about Azure Edition. You might want to ask about the license for that. It's a different type of license, but it might be something that's attractive to you. The price point might be attractive depending on your Azure usage. And portal evaluation, you're going to get a notification at the end here when you exit out of the webinar. You'll have an option there to request a eval of the portal. The portal eval, by the way, like if you're worried to try to get into it because you feel like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get somebody to install this and all this other stuff, the standard portal evaluation is just in the Amazon cloud. So you'll actually be able to just go there and play with it, or even send it off to your end user so that they can play with it and see, get familiar with the interface, see if it's something they want. It's just generic data, but it has all the functionality, and you don't have to install anything. You literally are just going to go to a URL, and you'll get a username and password to use when you request this. So that's part one. Part two, if your users love it and you're like, well, we want to actually try this out in our environment, then you can actually request like a proof of concept type. It's a full version of the portal. You can use it with your actual corporate data, your actual corporate models, and you can do that for a fixed amount of time, a few weeks, etc. So with that, maximum data modeling, by the way, if you want to reach out to me, I am on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on my blog is Maximum Data Modeling. If you just go to Google and type in Maximum Data Modeling, 3 words, you'll find all these contacts, the most convenient way to get in touch with me. Definitely join my LinkedIn group. I will send announcements for new webinars, new blog posts. There's conversations there around many different topics as well. And now we're ready for questions. So hopefully, if anyone out there has any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A section here. With that, I pass this back to
Okay, Victor, we have one question. Can you now have models from different versions in Model Manager?
Not in the Model Manager, no. You can actually load different versions of ERwin models into the repository. So for example, let's say you have some of your models in the Model Manager, but some holdouts in your team continue to use ERwin 7.3, you can manually load those 7.3 models into the web portal for analysis. However, no, the model manager cannot actually hold multiple different versions within it. Once you put a model in the model manager, whatever version it was when it went in, the next time you open it up, it will automatically be upgraded to the standard level of the model manager edition.
Okay, can we upgrade directly from 7.3 to 8.2?
Yes, you can. You definitely can upgrade. There's a direct path of migration.
Okay, just looking to see if any other questions are coming in. And it doesn't look like we have anything else. So with that, again, if any questions come in, just feel free to type them in, and we will wrap it up.
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks, Victor, for today's webinar. I want to thank everybody for attending. If you need to contact us, please contact us by email at info@techextend.com or by phone at 800-221-7710. Seeing no more questions, we want to thank everybody again and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.